Okay, so some good news after you worked through 4.5. This is a much shorter section and overall I think a little easier to understand. So relax, take a breath. You made it through cellular respiration. Now we're going to talk about fermentation. So fermentation is the last section of this chapter. I know you're sad, but it is the last section of this chapter. And fermentation is going to allow the production of a small amount of ATP without oxygen. So in an anaerobic condition, it's going to allow us to make a little bit of ATP. Nowhere near the volume that we made before, but it is going to let us make a little bit of ATP. Okay, so fermentation is going to allow glycolysis to continue, and fermentation allows this to happen, allows glycolysis to continue making ATP even when oxygen is not available. So if you remember, the glycolysis portion of the process really didn't make very much ATP, but fermentation is going to allow that small amount of ATP to still be produced even when there's no oxygen around. And fermentation, again, it's an anaerobic process. It's done without oxygen. It's going to occur when oxygen is not available for cellular respiration. So there's some reason that there's not oxygen or enough oxygen available to do the cellular respiration process, this fermentation can still occur. And this is not going to produce ATP, but it's going to allow glycolysis to continue. Okay, so fermentation is an anaerobic process that allows glycolysis to continue. So glycolysis, when there's oxygen around, it's going to allow for cellular respiration to occur. Glycolysis, when there's not oxygen, then there's going to be fermentation that happens. Fermentation is going to, again, allow glycolysis to continue making ATP. So fermentation itself does not make ATP, but it allows glycolysis to continue, which makes a small amount of ATP. Okay, so even when oxygen is not available, glycolysis is still going to happen. And our molecule NAD, want the little plus sign because it's polar, is going to be recycled to glycolysis again. Lactic acid fermentation is going to occur in the muscle cells. Glycolysis is going to split glucose into two pyruvate molecules. Makes perfect sense. That's what happened when we talked about glycolysis before. Glycolysis splits glucose into two pyruvates. Pyruvate and NADH are going to enter into fermentation. They're going to enter into this process of fermentation. And energy from NADH is going to convert pyruvate into lactic acid. So we wind up with this lactic acid. It's called lactic acid fermentation. And NADH is going to be changed back into NAD. Okay, and that's what's happening here. We have a 6-carbon glucose. We have NAD so this is adenosine diphosphate being made into adenosine triphosphate because this is the glycolysis portion. So we are going to wind up with a small amount of ATP in this particular portion. We also wind up with NAD plus being made into NADH. We get 2 molecules of ATP, 2 molecules of NADH. This 6-carbon glucose is broken into 2 3-carbon pyruvates, the 3-carbon pyruvate. That then enters into the lactic acid fermentation process. Okay, the pyruvates end up changed into lactic acid. At the same time, we end up with NADH is converted back into NAD, and that cycles back through this process so we can start glycolysis again. So this, just like so many things, becomes a recycled product, right? So fermentation and its products are important for a couple of reasons. First, alcoholic fermentation is similar to a lactic acid fermentation. So these processes are similar. Glycolysis splits glucose and other products and enter into fermentation. Energy from NADH is used to split that pyruvate into an alcohol and a carbon dioxide. And NADH is changed back into NAD plus, just like we talked about before. Then that gets recycled into the glycolysis process. So same thing here, very, very similar, right? We have a 6-carbon glucose that enters into the glycolysis cycle. We end up with 2 ADP that become 2 ATP. We end up with 2 NAD that become NADH. At that point, we wind up with 2 pyruvates. The pyruvates then enter into the alcoholic fermentation process, which is similar but not exactly the same as the last process we talked about, because what we wind up with is two carbon alcohols and 2 carbon dioxide. So the end result of alcoholic fermentation is two carbon alcohols and 2 carbon dioxide. We also end up with NADH that's broken back down into NAD, which recycles back through the process so that glycolysis can begin again, and this can all just keep happening. So fermentation is used in food production. We end up with yogurt, cheeses, breads, the yeast part of that process results in fermentation. Some lovely cheeses. We got some blue cheese, looks like some brie cheese, all these delicious cheeses that we use fermentation to create. And that's pretty much it. Obviously, the thing that they didn't come right out and say here is with the alcoholic fermentation, we wind up with alcoholic beverages like wine and beer and things like that, which, I mean, even though it might seem kind of funny now, at one point in history, those were very important beverages because water itself wasn't clean enough to drink, but ale and things like that were. So it was actually very important historically as well. Obviously, also very important economically, even today. So, all right, I told you 4.6 wouldn't be so hard. So 4.6 wasn't so hard. Take your time, go back through this, look through it a few times, understand the drawings. If you want to go to your book to look at this portion, this is from page, let's see, 116 to 119. All right, I will see you guys on Monday.